Rob Liefeld's Youngblood don't need no stinking direct market. Youngblood Deluxe gets its second printing. Or is it the third printing? Or is it a fourth printing? Well, maybe it's a fifth printing. We'll talk about that and more on today's Comic-Jutsu.
I'm just telling you, the culture at Marvel was changing. They didn't like how popular it would become. I mean, it's the easiest way. I can dance around it, but the bottom line was the sales were following Todd, Rob, and Jim, and the other guys. And they didn't. They were now. I think they thought that gimmicks sold covers. So a glow-in-the-dark Ghost Rider and an acetate, Power Man with an animation cell. Those fell flat. They didn't do like high sales. And because I think Marvel was like, it's our gimmicks that are selling these. We put 5 X-Force covers out, and we put 5 Spider-Man covers out, and we put 8 X-Men covers out. It's us. It's not you. It was us. And I think what happened in '91 has dictated the last 20 years of Marvel Comics, and how artists, you don't get to tell us jack anymore. It's a writer-driven TV room concept where we build a corporate strategy, and therefore really nobody gets to take a bow. Marvel takes the bow. I tell people all the time, Marvel has turned into a company that wants you to think that you press a button. There's a Marvel button in a room where you go, and a character comes out. Marvel made it. It's the Marvel button. And that's really kind of like, they don't ever say Rob Liefeld created Deadpool. I got to tell people, Rob Liefeld created Deadpool. They want you to believe that there was a button in a room that you hit, and Deadpool spit out, and Cable spit out.
Welcome back, denizens of the Comic Book Dojo. JT here with you once again, and today we're going to jump into the comic book Wayback Machine as we talk about the history of Rob Liefeld's creator-owned series Youngblood, which has had a roller coaster ride of an ownership history, which I can't even begin to explain to you, where he lost the rights at some point and then has somehow gained them back. So good for you, Rob. Here at Comic-Jutsu, we always want to celebrate creators maintaining control over their own creative works and intellectual properties, because goodness knows the big companies have been putting their foot on the necks of the little guys and the people that actually write and draw and create this stuff ever since comics have been a thing. It's something that we have to fight against. So here we go. The Wayback Machine. We're going to go ahead and program it for 1992, but before we hit the go button, let's go ahead and bring you up to speed on what's been going on, what exactly we're talking about. I'm looking at promotion from Rob Liefeld that he put out on his social media accounts, proclaiming that Youngblood 2025 will be available only in premium or premiere editions, exclusively online via live stream for 6 to 7 months prior to making their way to the direct market. In direct market editions, maybe longer. These editions will have unique cardstock covers. Live streaming is the first line of distribution for these comics. Retailers have proven unreliable with distribution of my work. I can't allow their inconsistent practices to dictate terms of my engagement with customers. My customers are left scrambling again and again for copies of my work. There will be launch exclusives, signed editions, foils, medals, etc. If and when I release these through the direct market, they will be with covers and printing for the direct market. Okay, he follows up on that after the book has been released and he's begun selling it to his consumers, customers, and fans, such as myself. I did pick up an issue of Youngblood Deluxe from the secondary market. It was roughly $10, including shipping, so I can't complain about that. Liefeld notified everyone that the release was a success. Here from his social medias, he posted, "Thank you everyone for the astounding success of Youngblood launch week. We have earnings sales of a top 5 book of the year past 225K and headed much higher. Online sales are staggering, and our Soul store celebration was massive. 6.5 hour lines. You did this. Thank you. That was Rob's post on social media. You can read that across his Facebook, Threads, I suppose on X, though I don't use that sewer of an app anymore. I prefer Threads, but that's just me. I believe his Soul store celebration was at the Golden Apple in New York. I did follow some people that went there and spoke to him, and I even considered reaching out to see if I could get somebody to get a signed copy for me, because I think he was selling signed copies for like $20, which is really reasonable. You know, all this, it speaks to the value of these books is equal to the value of what one can get paid for it. I mean, Rob Liefeld has his detractors, probably more detractors than any current artist active in the field, honestly. I think part of that is just outright jealousy. Part of it is just confusion. Part of it is projection. And maybe in some ways, part of it is earned. I mean, because he's never been a guy that's shy to talk. Anytime you put yourself out there and you make yourself available to these interviews and exclusive news bites and promotions and this and that, you're going to say things that upset people. But let's not discount the work that Rob did in helping create Image and the way that Image Comics, well, Rob, along with the other creators of Image, you know, everybody from Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee, Jim Valentino, Eric Larson, you know, so on and so forth. Will Portatio, though he wasn't there at the initial launch because he was overseas. Mark Silvestri, and of course Hank Canals. I'm just kidding. That's an inside joke for everybody. Hank Canals, of course, is Rob's childhood buddy who helped him create some of the ideas for Youngblood. So, you know, good for him. But anyway, the creation of Image helped break this stranglehold that Marvel and DC really had on the direct market. Before that, there were handfuls of independent companies that were putting books out, but it seemed like the deals that creators were getting were just not good for them at all. Like almost everyone that published through First wound up losing their rights to their characters for a long time, like Nexus, Badger, Grimjack, you know, all those books. You know, Dark Horse, I'm not sure how their deals work. I'm not sure if they had like various individual creator owned contracts or whatnot, but for the most part they seem to be very small, very focused on their own IPs. Valiant was all about their own IPs, so on and so forth. And it was Image that was like, this is for creators who want to own their work. Come to Image. The only thing we own is that eye on the cover, the little Image logo. You get to have everything else. So for that, for Rob's part in that, for whatever he did to drive the others, or even if it was just following along and cheering as the bandwagon headed down the street, he deserves his flowers for that. He deserves his kudos for that. And I'm one to give it to him. I've had my own love-hate relationship with Liefeld's work over the years. You know, honestly, I was there when his early work was coming out, and I really liked it, but at the time, I thought he was a poor man's Todd McFarlane. To me, McFarlane was really the best out of those guys that had that kind of style. The McFarlane, the Eric Larson, who to me, Eric Larson was at the bottom rung of that. He was like the poor man's Todd McFarlane, but that's just my opinion. I know there are people out there that consider this blasphemy, but I'm just shooting straight with you guys. So, you know, I had this love-hate relationship with him, but I could not deny the dynamicism that he brought to his action and his characters when he started working in Marvel. You know, I mean, I saw his stuff with Hawk and Dove at DC, and I thought, well, that's interesting. That's different artwork. But it wasn't enough to make me go and buy it. At the time, I really wasn't a huge DC fan. There were only a handful of DC books that would make me actually pick them up, like Teen Titans or a Batman book or, the main Superman book, that kind of thing. But when Rob took over New Mutants, I was instantly hooked. I was like, wow, this is great. Now, mind you, up till then, I know the urban legend is that New Mutants was dying. It really wasn't. The sales were always good. The sales were consistent. But to me, the series itself was really going through like a 3-year low point to me. I know the stories were probably better, with Lee Simonson writing, they were probably better than anything that that Liefeld actually helped come up with. But for some reason, the book, it just wasn't. It wasn't exciting. It wasn't engaging. A lot of the characters were really kind of ugly and downtrodden. And Rob made everything really sexy again. There's nothing wrong with the approach of what I'm talking about. There were plenty of solid storylines up to then. But it had really lost me. I was just not interested in New Mutants anymore. To me, New Mutants through its Bill Sienkiewicz run, okay, when he took over in the late teens or what have you, that book was incredible. It was one of those premier books to me. It felt like this is an adult comic. This is an adult superhero comic, whether it was ever meant to be like that or not. That's the way that it came across. But then after Sienkiewicz left and the art duties just passed from hand to hand to hand to hand, Brett Blevins took over for a while, and his art was great. He has this great expressiveness with his figure work, and the characters really come to life on the page. But in terms of pure 4-color combat, pure 4-color comic book action and excitement, he just didn't have it. He just did not have it. Sometimes an artist, they have to find the right character, the right tone, the right approach. You can't just plug every single artist into every single story and every single IP, and it's a perfect match. It just doesn't always work. For example, Mike Mignola, who I first really noticed on Alpha Flight, I just didn't care for. I didn't like it. Going from John Byrne's Alpha Flight to Mike Mignola's, to me, was a major downgrade. But then when Mignola, I'm talking blasphemy here for somebody. I know your ears are burning right now. It's okay. Write me an email at comicjutsu@gmail.com. But when Mignola created Hellboy, it's like, oh, wow. Suddenly I understand Mignola's artwork because he was in his environment. He was telling these gothic stories, these noir-tinted horror tales with monsters of every shape and size, and it fit him. Okay. And whatever excitement that Rob brought to New Mutants was appreciated at the time, though his output was inconsistent. It was up and down, but he just started throwing these characters out there, which just made the book exciting. You had to be there to experience it and just go, oh, wow, who's this Cable dude? What's going on with this Deadpool guy? All of this stuff. In a way, it's kind of, I guess it's kind of reminiscent of like the J.J. Abrams mystery boxes over and over again. Like Rob was just doing that. Every issue was a mystery box. And that's great when you have the machinery of Marvel around it to say, okay, these mysteries have to lead to something. It's been XYZ number of issues. Something's got to happen. This story has to progress. What is going on here? Because you see those deficiencies pop up during Image's first year because the stories are wildly inconsistent. Some of them are great from the get-go. Almost all of them are fantastic from the art standpoint, but it was the stories that immediately, in some cases, just felt so hollow. And Youngblood definitely had its issues with its stories. Okay. So people are definitely up in arms about, Rob saying that comic shops are too unreliable for his new book. So a lot of fans and retailers are up in arms about Rob proclaiming that he doesn't need the direct market, that he's just going to go direct to consumers. And, I applaud him for that. Of course, I don't want to ever cut out the direct market and the comic shops, because now, I mean, those are the lifeblood of comics. It's not movies that are bringing people into comics. It's the comic shops. You know, they're spread out across our country, and the ones that are surviving are the ones that are still providing actual comics for people out there that want to read them. But if Rob found a better way to just sell directly to people like you and I, then he should take advantage of it. So, you know, I already read Rob's tweet, but there was there was an addendum to that where he had posted again on his social media. Okay. So I'm reading from the popverse.com. They have an article there where they quote Liefeld, where he states, "When they couldn't even order my Batman cover correctly, that sealed it." Liefeld writes, "For months, I go to stores and their shelves are stuffed with unsold product, 15 to 30 copies of comics that did not move off the shelves and won't unless they're part of a discount sales opportunity. My comics are all gone. My variants, like Time Slide, are hunted at top prices online. My Deadpool team-ups are all gone, and now my Batman cover is sold out everywhere. The retail situation is upside down. I'd much rather be the guy with the empty slot due to demand exceeding supply, but all these unsold comics represent a huge misfire on behalf of retailers. Direct to consumer will continue to grow." There's also a mention here on the popverse.com article where they talk about Rob launching a Kickstarter campaign for Brigade. There was a bit of controversy about it because the hardcover edition was apparently never actualized. So I don't know, what the story is behind that. And I'm sure that warrants a deep dive of its own. But I'm not absolving Rob from that. But it's not what we're talking about today. Also on the popverse.com, they mention there are currently 4 versions of Rob Liefeld's Youngblood Remastered #1 for sale on his personal Whatnot store, all signed by the artist-writer. Youngblood #1 Launch Edition Premium Gold Foil Variant. Boy, this is a classic callback to the days of Valiant here. Gold foil variant for $160. Youngblood #1 Launch Edition Virgin variant for $60. Youngblood #1 Launch Edition Sketch variant for $60. Youngblood #1 Launch Edition Trade Dress variant for $60. So, there you go. If Rob can get people to pay him for those prices, take it. Why would you not take it? All that we have done as creators for decades, for a century now, is give and give and give and receive a pittance in return. Yes, it takes the machinery and the promotion behind Marvel and DC to get these things out to the masses. But if you don't have the quality work being created by the actual creators, none of that exists. We should be learning from what happened to Jack Kirby. What happened to the creators of the past that were denied rights for what they created. What happened to Steve Ditko when he's denied credit for Spider-Man. All of those things. So if Rob has figured out, I can make my money for this year by remastering my own book. All right, let's go ahead and punch the go button on the Wayback Machine. So I'm going to take you back to 1992. Little JT, I'm going to school in Winston-Salem at the time. Not yet the seed of what would become Strebo-Rama, Mutantville, Comic-Jutsu, all those things. But I was there. I'm the same person I've always been. Fascinated with my comic books, fascinated with my films, fascinated with kung fu movies, fascinated with ninja movies, fascinated with horror films, monsteramas, all of these things. All these things that would shape me into who I was, all these things that I was constantly told I was stupid for liking, that I was looked down upon, that I was made fun of. I'm sure some of you went through the same things. But if it's part of your blood, if it's part of your spirit, you're going to follow it. Okay, so I'm in school in Winston-Salem. I'm reading about this image thing happening, and I'm like, wow, this sounds really neat. Now, before those image books actually hit the shelves, there were a series of promotions about it that appeared in magazines and various other media. Okay. One being, from what I could tell, the first one was issue number 25 of Comic Scene. It's got Rob Liefeld's cover for issue number 1 right there on the cover of Comic Scene, and it proclaims there in the top box, Youngblood, Rob Liefeld introduces a new generation of heroes. Another issue that I'm going to look at, these were all released like either concurrent with or just before these books were released during that early spring and summer of 1992. The other one I'm looking at is Amazing Heroes number 202 from June 1992. And I'm actually going to read that first because it's much shorter, okay? Now, there's an interesting editorial that opens this, and it throws shade right at Liefeld. Now, I'm only reading this to you to give you the full picture of what's going on. Okay, so the editorial right here, it's numbered page 3, but I mean, it's literally the first page of the actual book. The editorial says, about this issue, you might be wondering why the Penguin's photo is sharing space with Jim Lee's drawing for our cover, which is an oddball drawing too, because it's like the big Jim Lee's Wildcats muscle guy, but then he's got the little guy's cigar like shoved in the side of his mouth, so it's weird. It's like a weird Photoshop. Okay, so back to the editorial. Well, we had a little trouble with the Image cover, which was supposed to be a jam featuring Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, and Todd McFarlane. For all you Image doubters, let me say that my overall impression of Image was of a bunch of smart, professional, punctual artists. Jim Lee and Todd McFarlane have been especially considerate under the circumstances, and regret not being able to give them a 3, 2. Jim Lee and Todd McFarlane have been especially considerate under the circumstances, and I regret not being able to give them a solo cover spot like I intended. I'd like to thank them for the time they spent trying to get this thing straightened out. In fact, I'd like to thank everyone at Image except Rob Liefeld. Anyway, the Penguin photo is there to promote a surprise set visit story that was graciously offered to us by DC just after we finished our solicitations for this issue. We could have used a Batman, but Pengy hadn't shown up on any covers by press time, and besides, I think he looks cool. The Penguin was always my favorite Batman villain. This is at the time when Batman Returns was being released as well. So that was the landscape of comic fandom at the time. Okay, and in this article about all of the original Image properties, Liefeld is given the shortest shrift here. He has the fewest amount of quotes in here, so I'm not sure what happened. He must have had some kind of static here with Amazing Heroes. Rob, if you ever come across this episode, write me and let me know the backstory of what happened with all this. Again, at comicjutsu@gmail.com. Okay, so they're asking all of the Image guys to explain the concepts behind their books. And this stuff is really fascinating because you get a peek into the mind of these Image creators, and you as to how they just come up with their ideas, because they're like, oh, well, mine's a combination of Batman meets Superman, or, you know, mine's a high-tech guy that does this or does that. Now, obviously, I'm paraphrasing because I don't want to sit here and read the entire article to you, but, I mean, that might make for another good fun issue somewhere down the road. So anyway, let me get back to this Amazing Heroes excerpt. So Liefeld, when they talk to him, the book I'm doing is Youngblood, and it comes out in March. It's a government strike force made up of super operative, extra-human people who have been genetically enhanced and scientifically enhanced. It's got a lot of government corruption and genetic corruption. It's like super steroids. In their environment, they, Youngblood, are the super celebrities. If somebody who could fly and bend steel in his bare hands and change the course of mighty rivers really existed, he would be the biggest celebrity on the face of the planet. The thing with Youngblood is that they don't just go to a superhero's headquarters, get an assignment, and go out. The government assigns them to terrorists, drugs, stuff like that. But they have PR people for when it's all done. They have a guy who spreads their speech for them. They have costume designers. They think about their public image. One of the guys in Youngblood is a paroled criminal to whom they just have said, hey, you've got some extra abilities and we want to insert you into the team. But he's still committing heinous crimes, and they, the PR people, cover them up. And you get to see how the PR people go to work, and everyone comes out smelling like a rose, just like our government. It's like real life, except with super people. That's how I see it. Within the Image universe, this celebrity status can be limited to just the Youngblood team. They're just extremely popular with the media. Silvestri. So do egos come into play? Liefeld. Oh sure, Shaft is a weapons guy and an ex-FBI agent who they yanked out of the FBI and inserted into the program immediately. He doesn't have any superpowers, but he's just as good with weapons and very athletic and agile. He's in training, and you're going to see that this is the first time he's on the job. He's going to be leading people who are used to being led by a guy named Battlestone, which spins off into another book called Brigade, but that is another story. End quote. Okay, so I will briefly mention, again, just hearing these guys like talk, it was almost like being in the room as they're like, they're pitching ideas and formulating their universe. And as a young creator who up until then, my dreams were, I want to draw Spider-Man. I want to draw Wolverine. I want to draw Doctor Strange. I want to draw Iron Fist. I want to draw Shang-Chi, the Master of Kung Fu. Excuse me, Shang-Chi, the Master of Kung Fu. All of a sudden, these guys were telling me, you don't have to draw Spider-Man. You can do your own. And it made my mind explode. And it was really like catching another creative wave. Now, I consider myself extremely creative pretty much through the entirety of my life, but it comes in ebbs and flows. There are times where you literally get caught up in a wave and you're producing so much stuff and there are so many ideas pouring out of you. And then other times there's nothing, your brain is wrung out like a worn out sponge. You just can't get anything out of it. You can't put anything into it. But hearing these guys talk about their concepts, it almost just dropped the shackles away from me. Like, oh, I don't have to wait to draw Spider-Man. Now, up till then, actually, I had drawn 4 issues of my own version of Spider-Man. It was the Amazing Stories of the Spectacular Spider-Man, issue 1, 2, 3, and 4. And all they consisted of was Spider-Man meeting my heroes and villains. They would meet a hero, they would fight accidentally, a villain would show up, they would team up, fight the villain. Through 4 issues. It was crazy. I have none of them. My mom threw them away while I was at school in Winston-Salem. So while all this is happening, Mama Strebo-Rama is back at home, going into my desk, taking my archive of comics and everything I had drawn and created up till then and putting it in the trash. Can you believe that? It still, to this day, makes me mad. Now, since then, I have everything I've ever created. Everything. Right here. It's all in my vault. Okay. I don't want to depress you guys. Okay. Let me get back to history again. Back is the Wayback Machine. Comic scene number 25. Okay, now this is going to be long. And the reason I want to do this is because I think there's a good lesson in here in comparing what these guys' intentions were setting out, what the actual books look, comparing that with what the actual books were like at the time, because in a lot of ways in some ways they didn't quite actualize what they told you they were going to do. The stories came off as a bit confusing, hollow, and lacking, and you didn't get a sense of a lot of the backstory that they talked about, that they had come up with and developed, but they just didn't quite understand, how to weave all this stuff in and out. Okay, so let's get into this article. So reading from Comic Scene here. Capitalizing on his success, Liefeld has decided to return to the super team that always played a very important part in his career, yet never appeared anywhere until now. After a 6-year wait, Youngblood is debuting in a 3-issue miniseries from Malibu. So here's Rob Liefeld's quotes. Youngblood has a history to it. It's almost ridiculous. It's actually the first thing I decided to do in comics. When I was just breaking in around 1985, my friend, scripter, former contributor Hank Canals and I developed Youngblood and its concept. We took it to several small publishers and decided to work with Gary Carlson of Megaton Comics. There was this thing called the Megaton Explosion that came out around 1985 to 86, which was a Who's Who / Marvel Universe type book for the Megaton characters and their universe. It had a double-page spread featuring Youngblood and about 8 of its characters, and it described who each character was and the book's concept. I did a couple of ads for the book and actually penciled the entire first issue. I was ready to go with it. Then I started getting overwhelmed by some of the work I was doing for Marvel and DC, and I decided that I had to make the stuff my priority. There was no way I could continue the body of work that I wanted to do with Youngblood, so there was no point in just putting out one issue. I was extremely slow in producing the work at the time, so we just shelved it. There's an actual first issue that's just sitting in my drawer that ironically was enough to get me my work at DC and Marvel. I used those pages as samples around the convention time in spring 1986, and those samples got me hired by Marvel and DC, so there's a weird irony here. I've talked to Youngblood about doing... Three, two. I've talked to Malibu about doing a Youngblood special where we can actually publish that issue, Liefeld adds. I would probably finish inking some of the pages, but it has already been penciled. Hopefully sometime it can see the light of day. Bringing Youngblood to the comic scene was simple enough for Liefeld, as was his choice of publisher. I've always liked the independent marketplace. I love the Marvel and DC comics. That's what I grew up on. But in my early to mid-teens, the independent marketplace really exploded, and I got into stuff like Grimjack, Sable, Starslayer, The Rocketeer, and Ms. Mystic. The independent marketplace lures me because I look at Marvel and DC and think, how many more super teams and characters can comfortably fit into the confines of the universe that they, DC and Marvel, have created? But in your own universe, you get to set and break the rules. It's your own playground. Realizing that such a playground might not fit in at DC or Marvel, the plotter artist decided to open up his park at Malibu. I knew Malibu publisher Dave Ulbrich, who has always been a really great guy. When the opportunity came, I mentioned it to him. A few months later, he called me back and asked, "Are you still interested in doing this?" I said, "As a matter of fact, I've been working on a new Youngblood project on the side." Just so that when the time came, I had a body of work that would be ready to go again. So we just set this whole thing up. According to Liefeld, much of the concept behind Youngblood evolved as a result of growing up in the MTV generation music videos in front of your face all the time. All those commercials and fast images, 24-hour news networks. One day I started thinking, if superheroes really did exist in the world, how would they affect us? Not who would fight them or what crimes would they solve, but how would it affect us? The media would certainly latch on to them. If there were superheroes, they would be the trendsetters, the guys who impact how people think, and they would be watched 24 hours a day. If there really was a guy who could fly and hurl buildings at people, this guy would be incredibly pursued, he continues. And in today's marketplace, that would just be hit from everything. That would just be hit from everything. I don't know if that's a misprint, if I'm misreading it there. I'm sure he would get corporate sponsors asking, "Would you sell my product? Would you be the spokesman?" In the Youngblood universe, the nuclear power race isn't the big race anymore. It's still a superpowers race, but it's now very literal. From genetic engineering to technological advances, the first few seeds of what became extraordinary individuals have now blown into a race to see who can create the better supermen. And the elite of these, in America at least, are part of a government team called Youngblood. Despite the singular name, Youngblood is actually broken up into 2 teams, with each group consisting of 6 members. One team serves as an FBI function, and the other as a CIA function. Liefeld explains, "I refer to them as the home team and the away team. Because just as the CIA functions outside America and the FBI functions inside, that's how these two operate. The concept will be made clear in the first issue. The home team tackles U.S. corporate-owned supervillains, while the away team confronts a Saddam Hussein type who has been exploiting the use of genetic engineering and more technological and chemical advances. He's a mass terrorist." Basically, I just lifted it from what happened a year ago with Desert Storm. In this scenario, however, instead of 500,000 troops being dispatched, one tight unit of Youngblood is sent in to do the job and get it done quickly. They're sent in to knock out this threat and the advances he's making, and there's some international intrigue as to whom he's allying himself with. There's a great deal of action and adventure dealing with different menaces, but you'll also see that what they do afterwards, what they do before and after they go into battle, and in their off hours, reveals Liefeld. Being in Youngblood is a 9-to-5 job for them. These are different shifts. There are different shifts for different people. They've got supervillains and menaces that they fight, but the theme that runs throughout the whole book and the characterization that takes place will be in reference to how they're treated and who they are in society. In addition to offering a flip cover, every issue features a 12-page story for each team, with both groups intertwining more closely by the third issue. Liefeld fans will be disappointed to learn, however, that the third issue is also the last. It's all I could fit in right now, he explains, but I wanted to get this out there. They're characters I like a lot, and there are themes in it that haven't necessarily been explored. It's not a Justice League of America / Justice League Europe type thing. They sign on for terms, 5 years, 2 years, 3 years. They're contracted to perform for the government. Some of them have been manufactured for the U.S. government. Others haven't. There's not a mutant in the bunch, but by the last issue, we'll be introduced to the first mutants that come out of the closet in the Youngblood universe. And that's a team called Genesix. Interesting title there. That was my interjection. All right, back to the article. This miniseries is an introduction to what both of those teams are about. Of course, there are also other countries which are jumping on the superpowered bandwagon. You'll see that Israel, Russia, and China are putting up their own super people, Liefeld says. For example, there's Masada, who is Israel's first and only hero to date. Then we're also introducing the Numbskulls, a group of guys who are literally the rejects of all the genetic engineering that's going on. They didn't quite turn out the way they were supposed to. This is crazy, but this is how I get my ideas. My dad had a brain tumor when I was in 6th grade, and it reoccurred twice since then. Thank God he has lived through each one. But when I was a kid, I remember that the entire half of his face was numb, and he's never had feeling in that side since. I also remember that I used to pinch his cheek and he couldn't feel anything, and I would just crack up. My brain then started going, what if there was a whole bunch of these guys? And these little third world countries sent them on the front lines of a war. They can get blown to bits, bullet holes rip through them. These guys are getting killed. They just can't feel it. So they'll just keep moving straight towards their goal. Although the public considers Youngblood to be heroes, some of the group's members can hardly be thought of as role models. One such member is Sci-Fire, whom Liefeld calls a serial killer. The government paroled him because he's what I call a triple kinetic, a pyrokinetic, a telepath, and a telekinetic. They put psychic dampeners on him and shut down his telepathic skills, but they want to abuse his pyrokinetic and telekinetic abilities for their own purposes. He's part of the away team, so he's not on U.S. soil all the time to be abused by the press. But this guy's pretty loony, and he's much more powerful than the government realizes. They're taking a risk by letting him walk around in the first place. The plotter artist's idea for another away team, Brahma, developed from a conversation he had with his triplet friends. One day I was sitting around talking to them, and I asked, how do triplets happen? They said that it's one big egg that splits into 3 eggs, so my warped mind goes, okay, what if that egg never split? Would this giant person come out? So Brahma, or Brahma, I'm not sure what pronunciation one wants to go with there. So Brahma is a triplet cell that never split. He killed his mom during childbirth because he's so damn big. Brahma, whose real name is Jeff, is in an extremely dysfunctional family. He adds his brother suffers from muscular dystrophy, and his father blames him for his mother's death. As he grows older, he excels in sports, especially football. He's in the line of scrimmage. So the NFL pursues him and says, hey, we'll take him right out of high school, but the government steps in and says, no, we want this kid. We're willing to match the NFL's price and then some. So his father tells him, we're going with the government for a better deal. Because of his guilt from his father, Jeff signs on with the Youngblood program, but he doesn't get to do what he always wanted to do. He's not in it for himself. He's in it for a bunch of other reasons, and will deal with their psychological ramifications. In every way and proportion, Brahma is incredibly large, and I figure out that he's the ultimate Rob Liefeld character. Because everyone says that I draw big, wide people with little pinheads, he laughs. So here's this big, wide, pinheaded character. Also reluctant to be on Youngblood's away team is Riptide. She can take any moisture that's in the air and create tidal waves or mass geysers. She can draw the sweat off someone's brow or the dampness in a room and just accelerate it. It's a mystically based ability, and she's a pretty powerful member of the group. As for her personality, she's not so much into the team. She's pretty much a loner who's looking to get out of it as soon as her contract ends. Then there's Sentinel, and he's actually the very first Youngblood member. Liefeld continues. He was a scientist-inventor who was part of the whole Youngblood movement, and he was contracted to create a bunch of exoskeletons that could be used by the military at wartime. But when he developed the exoskeleton, he made it so that it could be honed only by him. With the suit, he has amplified strength, speed, the power of flight, and some energy discharge power. He starts thinking, this is cool, so why am I selling this to the government? So he went in there and said, look, I'll continue to make exoskeletons for you, but I want to use this one. Sentinel actually touched off the whole movement that got other people thinking, hey, we could create an elite squad around him. But he was the very first one. He's the Mr. America, the Mr. Fight for My Country. He's the symbol of liberty among all these guys. Call him Mr. Youngblood. If the whole thing crumbles, he'll still be there because he believes in the project. Liefeld credits the 1982 film version of Cat People in helping him create Cougar. I always thought Cat People was the coolest concept, so Cougar is actually strung off of that idea, where there's a race of these cat people living in the jungles of Africa. These people are not lycanthropes, except they're not werewolves. They're like cat wolves. To make a long story short, Cougar's mother was found unconscious by an expedition and taken into their care. She mated with one of them, and the result was Cougar. He went back with her to the States since he was an outcast for being more human than cat. Since he's a product of a highly unknown alien civilization that lives on Earth, we'll have later storylines in which he and his mother do their darndest to keep this race hidden. They know that any government that discovers them will exploit them. So up to this point, little is known about Cougar to the rest of the world or the team. Liefeld's quick to point out that Cougar is not another Wolverine. He acts more regal and royal than brutal and savage, and he does admit that Cougar's creation has some strong ties with another X-character. I was going to introduce Cougar in X-Force, he reveals. He's one of the old 1985 Megaton Youngblood team. When I started working on the New Mutants, editor Bob Harris wanted to get rid of a bunch of characters and put some new ones in. Cougar was one that I had proposed, but I wasn't real happy with the way Cable, another Liefeld creation, was being used. At that time, I didn't have as much say in the plots. So I did a cover with Cougar that we canned because I was real unhappy with the way Cable was coming out. I just said, Bob, I'm not going to use Cougar anymore. When X-Force came out, I wanted to create a Morlock character for the team. Farrell was actually an ex-Youngblood member. It was going to be revealed that she would later follow Cougar to the States. But instead, I said, I'll make her a different character and throw her in X-Force. Two more aliens serving the Youngblood cause are Combat and Photon. But Liefeld will quickly pose the question as to which one is staying on Earth illegally. You always hear about the government covering up alien discoveries. Well, this is a case where they did, he says. There was this alien craft carrying two warring factions that crash landed on Earth. The government has limited knowledge on both of them since both aliens are still learning English. They're kept on separate teams. As we open, Combat is on the away team and Photon the home team, but they'll switch. They don't keep them on the same team. That would be like putting an Israeli and an Iraqi together in the same boat. They would kill each other. The government wasn't and can't be sure that one of these aliens was a prisoner on the ship while the other was a pilot. When the ship crash landed, things were in such disarray that they weren't quite sure who was who. Combat told them, look, I'm a wanted man and so is he. We'll trade you technology for refuge here on this planet. So they're thrown into the Youngblood project and forced onto the team. The government said anyone on these teams who doesn't like this stuff, who doesn't like it can stuff it, because these aliens are giving us valuable information and you are part of their protection. They'll function to serve you, but at the same time, you'll protect them if an alien ship appears one day and asks for them back. That's part of the deal. So there's all sorts of friction going on. Leading Youngblood home team is Shaft, whom Liefeld describes as an excellent marksman with bows, arrows, crossbows. He's real adept with weapons. He was originally an FBI agent, but they just snagged him out of there and told him, look, we need you. Here's who you're going to be. Here's your code name. This is your new job, and this is how you function. He didn't have anything to say about it. Although he's a natural to lead the team, it's the last thing he wanted to do. He was happier just being in his suit and tie and not fighting crime in spandex. When we open the first issue, we find out that Shaft is about a week into the job. He adds, the previous guy who held it, a guy named Battlestone, was tired of the government's bullshit. He left and formed a group called Brigade. The government isn't very happy about it, and we find that out in the miniseries. Readers will find out more about Battlestone and Brigade in their own 4-issue stint, which kicks off after Youngblood concludes. I created the characters for that miniseries, and I'll be co-plotting and inking it, states Liefeld. Hank Canals will script the book, and Merritt Michaels will be co-plotting and drawing it. And it's either in Youngblood or Brigade. I can't give away who, but one of the characters is a National Enquirer type reporter who has infiltrated the team and been given technologically manipulated superpowers. She's not who she claims to be, and she's writing an expose on the group. A handful of mystery men and women are also included in the Youngblood membership. Among them is Die Hard, the government's extra soldier type experiment, says Liefeld. He's the government's first and foremost genetic experiment gone good. They gave him the serum, the drugs, and the technology to be this ultimate soldier. He's incredibly strong and strong-willed. He has increased abilities all around. He's the closest thing to a Superman that the book has, but there's also a mysteriousness to him. You'll see him take off his mask and stuff. We'll follow him home a couple times, but as to who and what he is, it's going to be left up to the reader's imagination. Liefeld moves on to Chapel, then pauses. I don't want to give a whole lot away about Chapel, he says. If we have a dark, brooding character in Youngblood, it's him. He has no superpowers. He's a former soldier of fortune / mercenary. He had been working for the government in different capacity for years and was very effective in assassinating little third world dictators. So they said, come work for us. And he said, okay, if the price is right, I'm there. Then there's VOGUE, a Russian agent who just defected to the U.S. because she liked it here better. She's also very dark and mysterious. The Russians want her back in a very bad way. They'll put things in motion very early to get her back. Filling out the home team is BADROCK, a character Liefeld thinks is pretty cool. BADROCK is the 16-year-old kid named Billy, whose life has been the pits ever since he was a little kid. He was the kind of kid who has absolutely nothing going for him. His father worked for a corporation called GATE, Genetic and Technological Engineering Enterprises, which happens to be a major menace in the Youngblood universe. On his way home from school every day, Billy would visit his dad and see what experiments he was working on. Essentially, the best way to explain BADROCK is that you have characters like the Hulk, the Fantastic Four, and others throughout history of comics who have been the victims of horrible accidents. Billy did this accident to himself, however, to change his rotten life. He was a grade A loser. He went in his father's lab, drank this serum, and the end result created this 8-foot granite figure. And Billy digs it, Liefeld notes. He's not a tragic figure. He can lift cars and throw them for blocks. If he steps too hard on the ground, he'll cause a 6.5 seismic reaction. Wow. He has a lot of power in his fingertips, but he's very immature, and his parents are on the case. His parents were the only people who were ever really cool and understanding with him, but they were pretty shocked that he did this to himself. Now he's this granite super agent who gets paid big bucks for being in Youngblood, has a lot of power, and gets off on it. The public has no idea that within the shell is a 16-year-old kid. Okay, so there you go. End article. Okay, that last section was from Comic Scene number 25. And as you can see from what I read to you, Liefeld pretty much just told you everything. He gave you the complete and total backstories of all of these characters. Okay, so finally, issue 1 of Youngblood hits the stands. Now I'm all pumped and primed, ready to read this stuff. And it hits the stands. The cover release date is April 1992, but with release dates, sometimes books hit the shelves, months before what's actually printed on the cover. And I didn't know this was all going to be part of comic history, so I didn't, journal about it or anything to that extent. So I don't know if it came out as early as January or if it actually was in April, but it was all, roughly at the same time all these other magazines and promotions were coming out. So the book is released, and my initial impressions at the time was, one, like the story is minimal. It was super minimal, and I was coming from where my favorite book was Chris Claremont's X-Men, where the story was not minimal, where it was really nuanced and complex and all of these things. And all of a sudden in Image, there was none of that. But what immediately struck me was, it was some of Rob's best artwork to date, but also the coloring was fantastic. At the time, the coloring was like a light year leap forward beyond everything else that was on the stands, and it eventually just forced a change in the comic book in comic book creation, that Marvel and DC were eventually forced to make their coloring better, and it was all because Image just came out the gate and just outshone them. Their coloring was absolutely fantastic. Well, I think I've laid enough of the groundwork that we can now move over and start to talk about those individual issues. So I picked up issue 1 of Rob Liefeld's Youngblood Deluxe. As I said, I ordered it through the secondary market. Just looking at the cover, I mean, I guess I'm okay with the cover. The art, the coloring is changed. It's made more, it's made a bit more modern in its coloring, where everything is a bit more of a reflection of reality. There are a lot of browns and a lot of grays. And, my initial impressions, I don't think that's necessarily an improvement. I mean, throughout the issue, I don't have a problem with the coloring, but I'll tell you ahead of time that I do think they lost just some of the 4-color pop culture sensibility by shifting so much of the color over to trying to make it look more modern and realistic. The skin tones are all perfectly tan. There are no odd spectacular colorations running through the panels, that sort of thing. There's a huge shift towards making all the backgrounds gray or brown, which to me is not necessarily great. Okay, so let's open this thing up. I do like that they have the nice cardstock cover. That's nice. And right inside, you get this nice little splash page that's actually from issue 2. I had to go back to my original issues and dig them out. And they moved the intro for Youngblood issue number 2 straight to the beginning of Youngblood issue number 1. Now, the credits are listed on the inside page. Rob Liefeld, creator, story, art. Joe Casey, script. Matt Yackey on colors. Russ Wooten on letters. Drew Gill, production and design. Rob Liefeld and Juan Manuel Rodriguez on covers A through B, and Justin Harder on cover C. I guess I have cover A because it's the reproduction of the classic Youngblood number 1 issue. And right off the bat, also, like, the lettering is much better. It doesn't look like it was kind of forced into place like the original does. So anyway, so you've got this intro, which is from number 2. And in a lot of ways, I really have to commend Joe Casey. I'm going to assume that it was Joe Casey because he gets credit for script, who helped kind of restructure this. And that, to me, is the lesson that we can take away from this. That I think if you are an aspiring creator, whether you write or not, you have to learn how to tell a story, okay? Whether you consider yourself a scripter or not. If you're going to work in comics and you're going to tell cartoon stories that use sequential illustration, you have to learn how to tell a story. You have to understand, beginnings, middles, ends. You have to understand how to set things up, how to pay them off. You have to understand different narrative conventions. And in writing, sometimes the best thing that the creator can do is restructure what they already have. It's not so much in changing anything. Like, you don't make the events different, but you might take this event and move it to here, and that event, and you move it to there. And all of a sudden, you've done some chiropractic work on your storyline, and it makes more narrative sense. The threads are stronger. And I think that's what Joe Casey really helped him do here. Okay? So you got this introduction to issue 2 that introduces the Berserkers characters. So here it is, Youngblood number 1. And you're being introduced to the Berserkers and the character of Kirby and all of this. And you also get to see the big bad villain, Darkthorn, because otherwise you wouldn't have seen him at all throughout, this entire issue, because he doesn't appear in the first Youngblood at all. Okay, so they do introduce Lord Darkthorn there. So there is some groundwork being laid down where Rob talked about the alien interactions and whatnot in Youngblood. Here Joe Casey is helping him restructure his narrative, and he's letting him know, hey, we've got to introduce the big bad much earlier. Then we've got basically a reworked US Today page that introduces Shaft. So here you get a little background. Ex-FBI leads Youngblood, and it tells you, the bit of the backstory of Shaft, and that's a great way to just sit there and drop information into it. And then we move into what is the actual beginning of Youngblood. So about 4 or 5 pages in, and we finally get to see page 1 of the original Youngblood #1, which introduces Shaft. I already mentioned the coloring changes. And like I said, in some ways, they're really not an improvement. I might have preferred, the more 4-color sensibilities and the dynamic nature of the original a bit more, because everything here is kind of shifted a bit more towards just grays and browns and making it a bit drab, just it's the way it looks. So they're being introduced to Shaft, and there's a really neat sequence here where in the original book where Shaft is stopping this, I guess a mugging, where they're in the mall and all of a sudden this guy runs over and grabs a purse from a lady, and Shaft is like, well, I got to get to work, and he jumps in and tries to stop this purse robber, right? Well, as this is happening, there's apparently somebody on the 2nd or 3rd floor of this mall that has a gun, and he's just aiming it down at Shaft. I mean, it's a bit ludicrous because it's not really showing him as hiding or whatnot, and even his hand positioning in the artwork is a bit odd. But anyway, so he's aiming at Shaft, and he's going to shoot him, and Shaft takes his pen because he's in his civilian clothing. He takes all that he has, which is a pen, and he throws it at the guy and hits him, like Bullseye, showing that Shaft is dangerous and he can turn anything into a weapon, much like Bullseye in the Daredevil comics, And when Hank Canals scripted it, this is where part of the lesson is for me, okay? So there's a storytelling adage. I originally heard it in comedy. In comedy, there's a rule that you do it in 3 beats. 1, you tell them what's going to happen. 2, you show them what happens. And then 3, you tell them what happened. So you have this 1, 2, 3 where it's coming, this is it, that's what happened. And that's kind of how you tell the joke. Like if somebody's walking down the sidewalk and they're eating ice cream, you're going to foreshadow the banana peel that's ahead of them. That's telling them what's going to happen. Then you're going to actually show them slipping on the banana peel. And then you're going to show them reacting to it, where their ice cream falls on their face after they fall on the ground. And he's like, well, isn't this a revolting development? That sort of thing. So you have that beat. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so Hank Canals actually uses that beat. Now, I wanted to point this out because it's important to know as many rules of storytelling as possible so that you know when you can break them. Okay. So Hank Canals, he has Shaft responding. Somebody shouts, Jeff, above you, and he turns and he sees the sniper about to shoot him. So he throws his pen, and you have him saying, no arrows. This pen will have to do. So that's the telling you what he's doing, then showing it. He's throwing it. It hits the guy. What the guy? How? No arrows, gurgle. So he shows him. He tells him what he's going to do. Shows him doing it, and then he says, how? No arrows. The guy that gets hit says, how? No arrows. So he tells you what he's going to do. He does it. And then he tells you what he did. And it has that kind of 1, 2, 3 beat. And in some ways, it's just kind of cornball. So here, Joe Casey, instead of somebody pointing it out to him, Shaft realizes, I've just been made. He's classic distraction tactic. Never works. And he throws his pen, hits the guy. The guy falls. There's no 1, 2, 3 beat. It's just, hey, this is a distraction. I was just set up, and shows him getting out of it. And I thought that was pretty interesting because, I mean, the story doesn't lose anything from it. It actually shows Shaft as being, it still shows him being dangerous by throwing his pen, but it also shows him as being smart enough to realize, oh, that mugging, that robbery that I just stopped was actually supposed to distract me and set me up so this guy can shoot me. You know, it makes Shaft out to be a little bit smarter. Okay. So that's not bad. So they finish Shaft's introduction, and the girl that he's with says, welcome to your new life, Shaft. That's how they end the intro. And I like that beat. That's a nice beat from Joe Casey. I've been a fan of his over the years. I've probably slept on a lot of his work where I haven't read as much of it as I should have. But that's a nice beat anytime you introduce a new superhero. You know, you end their introduction or that first issue with their superhero name. I think that was, I first read that in the, in Peter David's, But I Digress articles back in the day, where anytime you introduce your character, you're building him up. And then by the end, he's like, hey, who are you? I'm Spider-Man. Well, here you go. Shaft. Okay. Then the scene shifts. You know, this is basically, following the original storyline here. Scene shifts over to BADROCK, as he's at home, eating his cereal that morning. And, you see that he is, he's just a normal kid. Now, I wanted to point out that BADROCK, he has a whole lot of similarities to Tommy, aka Monolith, from the Elementals, who was a little kid that gets put into this giant, earth rock body. It's also similar to Paul Chadwick's Concrete, which I do highly recommend if you want to see, if you want to read a story about an individual who, like the Thing, who's in a world that's not necessarily super powered, but it's more about how do they adapt to the challenges of having this body. Like, he can't even dial the phone because when he pushes it, it just smashes the entire phone, that kind of thing. So it's pretty neat. So, the dialogue is changed up enough here that I like it, because BADROCK is talking about a video game deal that he's a part of, and it's just more backstory. It's more of that showing Youngblood as celebrities, because once they kind of move away from Shaft being hounded by reporters and whatnot, you kind of lose that sense of they have this celebrity attached to them in being members of Youngblood. Though there's something really odd to me. It didn't come off so creepy in the original printing, but in this one it really does, where BADROCK is leaving and his mom turns and she's got like this picturesque, almost Stepford wife smile. She says, "Be careful, son. Make sure you smile for the cameras." And it just comes across as like super creepy to me, like almost like she's an android or brainwashed or something to that effect. Then we cut over to the introduction of Die Hard. And again, all of these introductions are better because right away, the narrative boxes explain to you that Die Hard is supposed to be a robot. Now, this is something that must have changed over the years, I guess, or maybe he's an android or something, because it reads here, shows him in his little containment rest unit or whatever. Diagnostics online, all pre-launch codes check, or maybe he's supposed to be some kind of super cyborg or whatever. It's kind of moved a little bit away from the super soldier idea, and because it refers to him as a Die Hard unit. It says Die Hard unit has cleared launch bay. Units are usually, robots, that kind of thing, whatever. Then it cuts over to the introduction of Chapel. The dialogue in this is much less misogynistic. It was really kind of misogynistic in the original, where he's shown in bed with this woman, who in the original printing, they were both colored to be African American, but in this one, Shaft is African American and the woman is colored more to be Asian looking. So in the original, it says, "Wake up, babe, duty calls. No promises, leave your number. You know the way out." That's what he tells her. But in the remastered version, he takes the call and he says, "Damn, they're looking for me. Time to go." And she says, "You got to work. Does that mean I can see you in your uniform you promised?" He says, "Fine." And again, this is, showing that bit of celebrity. So that's why I wanted to read to you some of the backstory stuff that was revealed in those early articles, because they weren't always successful in getting some of those flourishes to the surface in the actual product. Okay. And he says, "Fine. This is what you want. Does this turn you on?" Next page shows him in his uniform with his gun. I actually might like the coloring on this one a little bit better, though. Again, it's it's brown and drab. In the original, it had the white background, and there was more red than green used on it. Then they introduced Vogue, who's introduced very silently, and I guess she's thinking to herself, "So am I the only one that's aware that Sentinel's Iraqi OP has been that Iraq? When I say OP, I'm too used to the internet now. That Sentinel's Iraqi op has been leaked." And the original, she's thinking to herself, they think I'm at their beck and call. Let them wait. And in this, there's none of that. It's less about, this is the inner thinkings of the character, more about, okay, let's also do a little bit more mentioning, foreshadowing of the other group that's active. So all throughout this, even in the Shaft bit earlier, he mentions something about Marcus Langston's team in Iraq. So Casey is doing a lot more groundwork to get the mention and the foreshadowing of the Iraqi away team mentioned, so it's not so dramatic when you cut away from it. The original Youngblood, I really wasn't a fan of having like the two 12-page issues, the two 12-page stories in the one issue, because to me it felt like two incomplete stories. I actually prefer it the way that they've restructured it here, where it suddenly becomes one story, and you don't have the goofy gimmick of the two covers, one on each side, and you have to flip the thing over and all this kind of stuff. That aspect of the gimmick just never ever appealed to me. But this is good in how that they introduce they keep foreshadowing all of the elements going on. Okay, there's this mission going on at this time that we're being introduced to all these other characters. Okay, so the flip side intro is moved to here, where they have the news reporter giving the background details on this mission in Iraq, and introduces us to Hassan Hussein, or whatever this guy's name is, and explains that Youngblood was deployed. And then we cut over to what was the B-side, the away team story for Youngblood, and you have that brilliant double page splash by Liefeld. And I'm not sure that I'm a fan of the recoloring on this. I mean, they've added little flourishes, little flares, little Gaussian blurs here and there. But I don't know. I think when you kind of move back from it, it all just kind of blends together. The colors are too close together. Cougar is brown, but then the background is this mix of yellow and orange that's almost brown. Brigade is shown to have this red and silver armor, but then the red, it doesn't really pop out against the way the background is presented in this brownish and orange look. So I think on this particular spread, anyway, the original double page spread and the coloring in it is preferred. I think it's much more dynamic and exciting in the original. There's nothing wrong with it, mind you. Okay, it's just that I think it looks more drab. That's all it is to me. Now, I do kind of crack up at how generic the soldiers are, the Iraqi soldiers are that they're fighting. I mean, these guys could be the generic Hydra agents. They could be any kind of generic Doctor Doom agents, but here they're telling you they're Iraqis, so they're Iraqis, that kind of thing. And we continue following the away team here. The dialogue changes are pretty good here, because the exchanges before were just kind of quips, war's a game to you. Otherwise, this wouldn't be fun. This gets me pumped. Too rare for my taste. That sort of thing. But here they talk more like soldiers. There are references to things that help bring out their backstory. Cougar in combat. Those are the name of the two characters. They're fighting these the bad guys. And the dialogue is changed to where there's mention of combat being from Catella, which is this alien world, and that sort of thing. And again, that helps build that backstory between those characters. Because before it was just kind of tough guy, Arnold Schwarzenegger and Commando posturing, War is just a game to you. This is too rare for my taste. This gets me pumped. That kind of stuff. Liefeld's art looks good with the recoloring, but again, it's just this move towards making everything brown. It's made it more drab. I really like this kind of partial splash of Cougar leaping forward to attack. I like the way it looks more in the original printing. This was a page that really popped out to me. Anytime that they had characters that had that kind of Colossus metallic skin coloring to it, it looked fantastic, futuristic to me, 33 years ago. And the lighting on Cougar, I really liked here. I mean, I thought it looked really good. And the way it's been changed here, it's just been made a bit more drab. So then it cuts over to show Sentinel coming in, that sort of thing, and they continue their mission. Then we're introduced to Riptide and Brachma, and then Sci-Fire. Now I have a little bit of a quibble here with Sci-Fire because they changed his aura where it's green on the double page splash, but then here they make it looks like yellow orange, so it's like I didn't quite understand why it was changing, but then when they show them again later, it's got like sections of yellow and orange and then sections of green on it. So I guess the notion is that it's changing. And the coloring on Riptide's water slide it's okay. I mean, I don't know necessarily that it's an improvement over what was in the original book, and again, everything has been the colors have been kind of mellowed out, so to speak. I do want to mention that Sci-Fire, the appearance of that character, also pissed me off because I had a character that I had created called Sci-Fire. I used to make characters all the time in the old RPG Marvel Superheroes from TSR, which in my opinion is the greatest superhero RPG ever. We used to, spend a weekend making as many characters as we could. You'd make 4 or 5 characters using the Ultimate Powers handbook. And then out of those 4 or 5, you would find 1 or 2 that were really cool that you could play a campaign with. And Sci-Fire was he was my psionic character, so that really annoyed me. But he had like a helmet that enhanced all of his psionic abilities so far. So it always annoys me when I make something and then I see something in print and I'm like, darn it, they stole my name. And that has happened to me many, many times. But that's a tale for another time, I suppose. Then we cut back to the home Youngblood team, and you see Shaft and his team standing around in their pose inside their headquarters, their dynamic standing around talking pose in their headquarters. They learn about the escape of the 4. So here you're being introduced to the villains before they show up, and Shaft is saying, okay guys, we're getting ready to go into action. So again, this is all cutting back and forth between these 2 stories, which were in the original issue. They were broken up into 2 separate stories, 12 pages each. So then it cuts back to the away team. We see Brachma, Sentinel, Sci-Fire, blasting their way towards what is Hassan Hussein's headquarters, I suppose, or his bunker. There are little bits where the coloring has been changed, but again, I don't think it's necessarily an improvement. Okay. Little Gaussian blurs added here and there, little flare, a lot of little Photoshop toys that were not available 33 years ago. And I think it looks fine, and maybe this will make it more appealing to some kind of modern reader, but I don't know. I think Rob he kind of has an established audience at this point. And, I guess we're the ones that keep buying this stuff over and over now. And you see all of the away team get taken out except for Sci-Fire. Remember, Rob told us he was a lunatic and he had all these powers and whatnot. So the dialogue here is much more interesting. Sci-Fire just starts monologuing about, about crazy stuff. He says, by all means, send your toys to deal with my thick-headed teammates. That leaves you and I alone to talk about life, about sex, about pain. In other words, things I'm intimately acquainted with. So it does a much better job of showing you, hey, this guy Sci-Fire is kind of nuts, okay? Because the dialogue in the original was, they don't know that I could have taken you out from the States when you least expected it. But I wanted to do this personally. So again, I think this is a great lesson in storytelling for anybody out there that wants to learn from this stuff, where you see a guy who's really a master storyteller in Joe Casey working with a guy who's a dynamic, expert artist in storytelling, but not with the dialogue, not so much. Okay. Rob had a lot of ideas, but he had a hard time actualizing it and getting those to come through without the help of a really talented writer who could put some more nuance into it. And we see the fighting continue. Again, this was another page that really popped out to me, where we see combat without his helmet, and he has those Colossus arms. I remember just looking at this, I'm like, gosh, this looks like it was colored in the future, just the reflections and the way that the blues and the whites and the other tones all blend together to make it look metallic. And, it looks more polished in the remastered version. I think it's fine, but the coloring in the original, it stood out to me. I remember just flipping to that page. I'm like, wow, the coloring in this is fantastic. Now at the time, I'm drawing my own stuff, and I'm like, it's like magic to me. I'm like, how did they color this? I mean, it's like they made some sort of deal with the devils. There's some sort of magic occult ritual behind this. I have no idea how this stuff is colored. And it was really fantastic to kind of be there and experience all of this. It was really like a paradigm shift forward for comics as a whole. Okay. So we continue watching the banter between these guys. You get a much better idea of the backstories and their individual natures. There was something that was kind of confusing about how Combat was calling something his brother, and I couldn't make heads or tails of it at the time. It was like, well, is this big robot thing he's fighting, is that his brother, or is he talking about his brother somewhere else or whatnot? But here, he's making these different references. If I'm to be trapped on this backwards rock of a planet, I will not be bound by its morality. This world will know what it means to deal with a Catellan warrior born by my iron hand. So it's a better glimpse into his backstory, and some of the clunkier dialogue references are taken out. So that stuff is okay. So breaking up the story even further, so we flip the page, and they actually have page 1 of Youngblood number 0 in here. I had to dig through like 3 issues just to put this one review together to understand where everything came from, where they completely repurposed page 1 of Youngblood number 0 to help it fit into this story. And it's a scene at the White House, and it has the president talking about the various Youngblood teams. And at the bottom of that page has probably the best helicopter that Rob has ever drawn. I mean, that is a great helicopter. He had to be referencing something there, because usually his helicopters, they look kind of like animal balloons, how like when a clown will tie a balloon into an animal. That's kind of what Rob's helicopters look like. They look like helicopter balloons, like somebody took a balloon and blew it up and then twisted it into the shape of a helicopter. This one on the bottom of this page with the White House scene, it actually looks like a really good helicopter, and it blends seamlessly into the next scene, which shows the 4 in their own helicopter, and it's their helicopter because they put a big 4 on the side of it. I love the vanity of the villains in this world. They put a big 4 so everybody will know this is the 4's helicopter. And again, here we see the coloring has been changed, and the character, I guess, is Deadlock. Is he's shown flying. He reminds me of what was the character's name? Gizmo from the Teen Titans villain, I want to call him the Frightful Four, but I forget what it's called. Well, anyway, it kind of reminds me of that character, but in the original, he's colored, his skin is red, and his costume is more red, but here his skin has been changed to normal skin tone, and his costume is made brown and green. So again, everything is made more drab. So really, I don't think all of the coloring changes were a success. There was a push to make all of the environments, reflect reality, and that concrete is gray, buildings, the windows are blue, the sides of them are gray, and it makes the entire thing drab, and it really removes a lot of the 4-color creativity of what we get with comic books. Okay, so we have this little 2-page where the 4 are introduced, and they have their strong guy, who is curiously named Strong Arm. He rips the back off of this transport vehicle that ostensibly carries their 2 missing team members, which I guess is Gage and Starbright, or either Deadlock and Starbright. I'm not exactly sure because they don't put. Yeah, it's Deadlock and Starbright. Okay, they do a better job in the remaster version where Forearm actually says, Deadlock, Starbright, welcome back to the land of the free. Hope you survive the experience. And then we have, you have Die Hard, who swoops in and starts smashing Strong Arm all around in a nice little fighting smash up. And again, the colors are changed. It's less dynamic. The greens are taken out. Everything is moved towards reds and browns and yellows, and I just don't know that it's necessarily an improvement. I mean, it looks fine. Everything has kind of been smoothed out, but it's just not quite as over the top as it was. So after that big punch, we get the beautiful double-page spread of Youngblood's Shaft's home team as they are advancing to attack, as they're like coming over a little pile of rubble or something here in the middle of the street, and you see everybody in their cool action pose, and yeah, it's a great double page spread, and it makes you hungry for more story, but it also leaves you like, oh man, it felt like this story was just getting started. So in the original, that's when it cuts over and you're supposed to read the second part of this flip book. I guess you could read either side of the flip book, first and then read the other. But by restructuring it in this way, where instead of just ending that story altogether, they just cut to the other scene of what's going on here with the caption Baghdad, and it shows Sci-Fire again. And here they do have some green mixed in with his aura. And you've got basically, Sci-Fire is monologuing to Hassan Hussein here before he does what he does, where he uses his psionic abilities to make his head explode, I guess, because it kind of happens off screen. But they spent a page and a half, showing this guy and showing this guy's abilities. And Joe Casey uses this opportunity to let you really dig into his backstory more. And he does a good job at that. The only problem I have with it is on the very first panel. It's a three panel page, and where you see Sci-Fire floating over Hussein, and the placement of the dialogue balloons really bothers me. They put so much dialogue in there that they had to cover like a chunk of the art right in the middle. And not that that's like a super great, art panel or whatever, but I don't know. It maybe could have been put down a little bit lower to cover, the shoulders of the bad guys rather than right over the central focus of the character, which is Sci-Fire. I mean, it covers all of his lower torso pretty much. But anyway, so Casey puts in, this monologue that lets you get a glimpse into how much of a maniac Sci-Fire is, where Hussein calls him arrogant scum. And Sci-Fire says, no doubt about that. Mom and Dad Waller felt the same way. They felt little Davy was a bit too full of himself, even before my telekinetic and pyrokinetic abilities kicked in. Remember, Rob explained he is pyrokinetic and telekinetic in that issue, in that article. He continues, they were the first deaths I experienced. From here, I got a taste for it. As a telepath reading the mind of someone in their moment of termination. Well, it's better than sex, Hassan. You know what I mean? Even with the psychic dampeners the Pentagon clamped onto my brain, I can still smell your fear. So there you go. So Rob told us before that he was insane and he had psychic dampeners that they had put on him to help keep his powers governed, but that never came through in the way the original story was presented. Because I read you the dialogue from the remaster. Now I'll go back to the original. And in the original, he says, I actually admire what you've done here in this backwards country. It's just that mine pays me more. So there's a huge difference there. I mean, yeah, he's still a scumbag through that dialogue, but there's more of the backstory told. Now, mind you, as storytellers, we always have to strike that balance between show and tell. Now, this is a literal telling. He is telling, but it's in the middle of this showing of him, kind of going too far, using too much force, using too much violence, and executing this man without authorization, So, there's always this delicate balance that has to be struck between showing and telling. Okay, so he explodes his brain. That goes out over 3 or 4 pages, which is really odd to stretch that out for so long, but it does. And then the rest of the Youngblood away team comes in and witnesses the remains of this carnage of what happened here. And then Sentinel comes in, and we have our bits of closing dialogue. And Sentinel makes reference to we need to get what we came here for. He's locked up in here somewhere, which is a reference to Prophet in issue 2. And the very next page is an ad, of course, for Youngblood Deluxe number 2, which features Prophet right there on the cover. So nice little way to continue the storytelling and to give you a hint of, okay, there is an actual goal that these guys are here for. It wasn't just to blow this guy up, which is already done. So both narrative threads are left open, but there's just enough of a hint of a tease to, make attentive readers and, fans of Rob's storytelling and his creations to make them want some more. So there you go. That is my review of Youngblood Deluxe number 1 by Rob Liefeld, with new dialogue by writer Joe Casey. This is JT. You've been listening to The Art of Comics, aka Comic-Jutsu, and I hope you've enjoyed this. I apologize for the brief hiatus that was unintended. I wanted to do this Youngblood Deluxe discussion because, as an independent creator, I think it's important for us to pay attention to what's happening in our marketplace. And, Rob has really been a trailblazer for comic creators over the years. Love him or hate him, you have to give him his credit. Okay. And he even deserves credit for helping bring, Alan Moore back into superhero comics, back into regular comics that people could read, because for a long time he wouldn't do any. And then somehow Rob got him to do several things. I guess Todd got a hold of him first, and then Rob was like, hey, come and do this, come and do that, come and do this. And he eventually got Alan Moore to write that fantastic run on Supreme, which still ranks as some of my absolute favorite Superman stories of all time. But regardless, this is JT. Of course, I am continuing my own work on my own graphic novel, which is always my primary focus. What I do through Comic-Jutsu, whether it's through the YouTube channel or through the podcast and the various platforms, which wherever you're listening to this, make sure that you subscribe to Comic-Jutsu on the platforms. Whichever, podcast platform is your preferred, Comic-Jutsu should be there. I have it going out to as many as I can think of. And of course, subscribe to the YouTube channel, which is kind of my primary social media focus. I'm available on all aspects of social media, but I hate the internet. I think it brings out the worst in people. I got into the internet when all this started, thinking that there would be star children, but it's just filled with a bunch of moon beasts that look to tear everything apart around them. But anyway, I like to focus on the positive and think positive for the future, for me, for you, for comics, for storytelling, for all of the above. So I hope if you're an independent creator that something here has helped spark something in you, giving you a little bit of inspiration to keep moving forward, whether you're established or not. Maybe you have you have your own ideas to create something of your own IP, your own stories, your own superheroes that you can own. Or it doesn't even have to be superheroes. It might just be, urban horror or supernatural tale or what have you, but something that you want to own and you want to put out there. And, hopefully this just gives you a little bit of a spark to keep going, keep working at it. Just day after day, just put one foot forward and the next, and then the next, and then the next. And eventually it will all come together and your journey will be complete. All right. Well, I'm JT. Thank you for listening. This is Comic-Jutsu, and you have been listening to the art of comics.